I believe that everybody knows the story of the Titanic, but not too many people actually know the entire story, if that makes any sense at all. This YouTube series will be dedicated to telling the story of the Titanic and the story of the few days after the ship had sank. The story of the Titanic begins in 1909, where at Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast, Ireland, the Titanic's keel was laid. There, for 3 years, the ship would be constructed, and it would turn into the most beautiful ship in the world. After the Titanic was launched, the fitting out process began. The fitting out process is basically taking the empty hull of the ship and turning it into the working Titanic. The work was going very well, till, unfortunately, something happened with Titanic's sister ship, the Olympic. The Olympic dragged a Royal Navy ship called the HMS Hawk in, and because of its very powerful propellers, the Hawk was pulled into the side of the Olympic, crashed into it, and damaged 2 watertight compartments. Now, fortunately, Olympic is able to stay afloat with 2 compartments out of its 16 flooded. So, they took Olympic back to Southampton, where the Titanic was being built. They pulled people off of working the Titanic, and they made sure that they went over and started working on the Olympic. It took 6 weeks to repair her hull. After the RMS Olympic was repaired due to her collision with the HMS Hawk, work on the Titanic began underway again. It didn't take very much time until Titanic was a functioning ship. Some of the pictures we're seeing are of Titanic. The Titanic was ready within, I believe, 2 weeks of her launch date. And soon, she would be ready to commence her sea trials. The sea trials are when they take the ship out into the water, do some tests, like, for example, how fast the ship can turn, or how fast Titanic could stop in time. And she succeeded. The sea trials were a massive success, and Titanic got her certification, and she was ready to take on the world. The Titanic would begin its maiden voyage on April 10th, 1912. It would start at Southampton, and then it would go to Cherbourg, France, Queenstown, Ireland, and then it would go across the ocean to New York. Quite a few people joined the Titanic on its maiden voyage out of Southampton, about 920 passengers worth. And it may seem like that's a big number and that people were excited to see the Titanic go off, but it really wasn't like that. The Titanic was old news. Its sister ship, the Olympic, had already completed its maiden voyage and has already done everything. Among those passengers was Thomas Andrews, Captain Smith, and several other very famous people. As the Titanic was steaming out of Southampton, disaster almost struck. A ship called the SS City of New York, the ship that you are seeing in this picture, broke from its steel mooring lines and began to swing out towards the Titanic. Fortunately, Titanic's captain ordered the port-side propeller to be reversed and the engines to be stopped. And a tugboat that was close by helped out to push the city of New York away from hitting the Titanic. Though disaster was averted, hitting the Titanic could have saved it a much worse fate. After a long voyage, finally the Titanic arrives at Cherbourg, in France. It arrived at 6:35 or 6:30 p.m. Titanic was too big to get into port, so they sent out 2 tender ships, nomadic, which carried first class, second class, and their luggage. And then the second ship was the SS Traffic. And this ship carried third class, luggage, and mail, because the Titanic did in fact carry a lot of mail. And several people did disembark the Titanic as well at this time. After all the boarding was set and the tenders were heading back to shore, the Titanic started its engines again and started its voyage to Queenstown, Ireland. And so the Titanic arrives in Queenstown, Ireland. This was Titanic's last stop on this side of the world before she went across the ocean. And when Titanic got to, I'm just gonna say Ireland, 2 tenders had to come out to the ship, and these ones I believe were named the Ireland and the America. But if you want to type in the comments if I'm right or wrong about that, go ahead. So the tenders came out. I haven't done too much research on them, but I assume they did the exact same thing that Nomadic and Traffic did. Take passengers on, take passengers off. And you might be wondering where all of these pictures came from. Well, most of them. A lot of them were from this guy who was on the Titanic named Francis Brown. He was on the Titanic taking pictures, and because of him, that's the only reason we have pictures of the Titanic during its voyage. One of the pictures he managed to take is this one. This is the last known picture of Captain Smith sitting on the bridge. You can clearly see him from that very obvious yellow circle. Once Father Brown, or Francis Brown, got off the Titanic, he took one last photo of it as the Titanic sailed off into history. After the Titanic left Queenstown, she was on her voyage to America. And not many notable events happened during this time frame. The one notable event is that the wireless system, basically the radio, on the Titanic broke down. So Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, who are the 2 wireless operators, they decided to try and fix the radio, which they shouldn't have done. Because the rules for Marconi Wireless, or the radio, back then were that you do not fix it, use the emergency system, wait until you get into port to do that. And I believe the radio broke down on the 13th, April 13th, and they've worked all throughout the night into the early morning hours of April 14th, and they finally got it working. And both of them were very, very tired, didn't get a lot of sleep, and had to catch up on passenger messages, other messages, iceberg warnings, and that is what basically happened on April 11th to the early morning hours of April 14th. There's really not too much else to say. If you all know in the comments section anything else I can say about that, that would be really cool of you to tell me. Thank you all for watching part 3 of my Titanic series. It's actually been very fun learning what I want to share in this. And before I go, I do want to correct something. On my first Titanic series video, I said that the Olympic was taken to Southampton. That is wrong. The Olympic was actually taken to Belfast, where Titanic was being built. I don't really have much else to say other than thank you for watching, like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video where we talk about the sinking. At the beginning of April 14th, not too much was amiss. Life was going well on the Titanic, and she was continuing across the ocean at a pretty fast rate. And that was very impressive because the last boiler room wasn't lit. Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, the two wireless operators, continued to sort through the backlog of messages and to take ice warnings to the bridge. After a while, the Titanic's horn sounded for the last time at noon. At about 7:20 p.m. that night, the wireless operator on the Titanic hears a very loud ring in his headphones. That ring was from a message being sent by the SS California. The ship was stopped for the night due to being surrounded by icebergs. The Titanic's radio operator literally tells him to shut up and goes back to doing his messages. The Californian's operator thinks that was pretty rude and goes to bed for the night. They would not know about what happened to the Titanic several hours later. At 11:40 p.m. that night, lookout Frederick Fleet spots an iceberg in front of the Titanic. The Titanic is very close and only had about 30 to 40 seconds to avoid impact. The person at the helm turns the wheel until it is hard over, basically until the rudder cannot turn anymore. The Titanic, its engines are set to stop, and slowly, very slowly, the bow begins to swing away from the iceberg. But it is not enough. Titanic hits the iceberg on her starboard side below the waterline, puncturing 6 of her watertight compartments. And remember, the Titanic could only stay afloat with 4 compartments flooded. After the iceberg impact, damage inspections were carried out. The Titanic was set to move ahead very, very slowly, and the damage inspections proved that Titanic was going to sink. The wireless operators were told to send out an SOS, and a ship named the RMS Carpathia responded, and originally, the crew on the Carpathia did not believe that the Titanic was actually sinking, because during the time of Marconi wireless systems, there were actually trolls who would use the systems and say that they were a certain ship sinking, even though there was not. So that's why the Carpathia's crew didn't really believe it. Although the wireless operator on the Carpathia and the one on the Titanic were friends, so he knew that it wasn't fake. He rushed into the captain's bedroom when he was sleeping and told the captain what was going on. The captain believed him, and they made all course for the Titanic. Titanic was doomed. SOS calls were sent out. Lifeboats were launched. Passengers originally weren't all that concerned, but as the Titanic's bow dropped lower and as the power got weaker, the passengers started to panic and actually want to get into the lifeboats. Lifeboats, as I said, were launched, and as Titanic's bow went lower and the stern went higher, the boats left the scene, lights were spotted in the distance, and flares were shot up from Titanic's bridge. Within 2 hours, Titanic had sank. Titanic is gone. The people in the lifeboats spend the next 2 hours in freezing cold weather as the sun starts to rise. And as the sun rises, they see flares in the distance. A rescue ship has arrived, and this rescue ship is known as the RMS Carpathia. A beautiful, small little ship owned by the Cunard Line. She approaches the scene and starts to take on survivors. It takes several hours, but the Carpathia is able to take all survivors on board. As the rescue is concluding, another ship shows up. This ship is known as the SS Californian. The ship was only about 19 miles away from the Titanic as it was sinking, and they have only realized the extent of the disaster this early morning. After the Californian wireless operator heard about the disaster over the wireless system, they made full speed for the scene and asked Carpathia if they wanted them to take some survivors. But the Carpathia said anything that can be done has been done, and to look around just in case there was any survivors. The Californian looked around but didn't find any survivors as the Carpathia headed to New York. Carpathia arrived in New York on April 18, 1912. She dropped off the passengers and dropped off 13 of Titanic's 20 lifeboats, as she had picked quite a few of them up. The disaster shocked the world, and multiple news paper outlets reported on the disaster, saying multiple different things. It was known that Titanic had actually sank. There were several investigations into the disaster, of which it was concluded Titanic actually sank intact, which we now know that was wrong. And after the investigations were over with, the survivors had time to heal from this horrific tragedy. Everybody knows about the Carpathia due to the Titanic sinking, but not many people know about what happened to the Carpathia after the Titanic sank. Where we will begin in Carpathia's story is World War I. It is July 17th, 1918, and Carpathia is sailing in a convoy of other ships off the coast of Ireland. Unbeknownst to all of them, a U-boat named U-55 is slowly approaching their location. The captain of the U-boat has his sights set on the Carpathia and is planning to torpedo the ship. Carpathia has been hit, and evacuations are taking place as Carpathia is sinking very slowly. 5 people are dead, and the rest of the about 218 people on board are getting off the ship. The U-boat then surfaces and takes a very famous photograph. The photograph that is on screen now is a real photograph of RMS Carpathia sinking. U-55 has sank Carpathia and is now trying to leave the scene. Unfortunately, it has been spotted already by a warship that has arrived on scene. This warship is called the HMS Snowdrop. She has arrived on scene and is scaring away the U-boat, and after that is done, she rescues RMS Carpathia survivors. Rest in peace, Carpathia. You will be missed. The Titanic's discovery is a very cool thing to talk about. She was originally discovered in 1985 by Robert Ballard. And originally, Titanic was a cover story because the US military wanted to find 2 submarines, the Thresher and the Scorpion. And I will be showing pictures of their wrecks. Robert Ballard found those submarines, saw that they had imploded on their way to the bottom, much like a certain other submarine that we might actually talk about a little bit in this video. But he found those submarines and had a bit of time left, so he went looking for the Titanic and actually found it. And here I will be playing a video of the actual discovery of the Titanic.
Forward, wide. It's a boiler!
Now that is probably one of the coolest YouTube videos that I've watched in a while. He discovers the Titanic. Sure, it was only the boiler, but he discovered the ship shortly after as well. And one more cool thing about the Titanic and the first discovery is that when they were celebrating and stuff, one member of the team said something that made them all stop celebrating, and that was, she sinks in 20 minutes. Because it was about 2 in the morning, and the Titanic sank at 2:20 on April 14th, obviously. So they all stopped partying because they just found a grave site. And they went out on deck because the ship they were on, they had a bit of a memorial for all the survivors, or, well, all the people who died, probably the survivors as well, I guess. And that is the story of how the Titanic was first discovered. So, the OceanGate sub is actually a pretty interesting story. On June 18th, which is actually a day after my birthday, what luck, right? The sub went down, and it was going to go to the Titanic, as usual, but a short time into the dive, the ship that the sub was communicating with lost contact with it. And a huge search effort was put underway, because if the sub was still intact, it would probably be on the surface or stuck on the ocean floor. And there was a very strong possibility of the sub actually getting stuck in the Titanic's wreck. But, unfortunately, after days of searching, on June 22nd, they found the sub. It was about, from what I've heard, 1,500 feet off the bow of the Titanic, and it seemed to have suffered a catastrophic implosion, and all 5 people were dead. So, that is basically the story of Titan. In this episode of the story of the Titanic, because I've already gone over the entire story and everything that I want to go over, this last episode is going to be a couple different what-if scenarios about the Titanic and what I believe could possibly happen. So, let's get into it. This right here is a what-if scenario on when Titanic was just leaving Southampton, I believe, and the SS New York broke away from its mooring lines and almost slammed into Titanic. But this what-if scenario is going to be, what if the SS New York hit Titanic in Southampton? So, what I believe would happen is there would probably be some damage above the waterline, similar to what happened with Titanic's sister ship, the Olympic, but I don't think Titanic would be in any danger of sinking. The New York, I think that ship would also be fine, but both of them would need repairs, and unfortunately Titanic would not be able to go on its maiden voyage. But if White Star Line repaired the ship, then it would probably have lasted about as long as the Olympic, unless it was sunk in World War I. But we've got a couple more theories to go over, and yes, they are going to be as short as this one. This is a pretty well-known theory. Up next is, what if the Titanic had hit the iceberg head-on instead of having a glancing blow? Now, if you look this up on the internet, there will be a lot of misinformation about a shock going through the entire ship and popping out all the rivets and plate seams and everything, but that would most likely not happen, because icebergs are floating, and even though the one Titanic hit was pretty strong, the bow of the Titanic would crumple and absorb most of the collision. A lot of people would still die, a lot of the firemen and stokers and all of those people had their bunks right in the front sections of the Titanic, so there would be a lot of death but the Titanic would have stayed afloat. And I actually have drawn this entire thing and what I think is going to happen. So I will play that right now. This right here is the last theory we'll be discussing in this video. It is, as the title there said, what if the Titanic's stern stayed afloat after the breakup? I also drew something about this, so I'll be putting that up in a little bit, but in short, I think that the Titanic's stern would probably be towed either to New York, to Halifax, or maybe even back to Belfast, and it probably would have gotten broken up because it would have been very expensive to rebuild the Titanic. There probably could have been a lot more survivors if the stern did stay afloat, but I really don't have too much information on this, so tell me in the comments what you think. I'll show my drawing now. Thank you all for watching the full movie of the story of the Titanic. It was a pretty fun series to make, I guess. Very long for sure, but it was pretty nice to share the story. If you all want to leave any comments or anything telling me if I should do stories of other ships, I would really appreciate that. But thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.